Hello, everybody. I'm Shahin Sayadi, and I'm of One Light Theater. And a while ago, I decided that I need to do some work online. I felt that there's a lot of room online to be occupied by artists of color, and I decided to do these talks, things that are important to me and interesting to me, and I think they're important to a lot of other people. Arts, culture, politics of the day, things that are important in today in our communities, and that's why I started doing this. And I've been putting them live on, and I'm just learning about it, and we've been putting it live on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, but they live on my YouTube channel. And today we're going to talk about performing after COVID, basically talking about the world of performing arts after the pandemic. And we all know how it has been shattered. We really feel, as a person who works and lives in performing arts world, feel like we'll be the last one to go back to work. And that's why I have decided to talk about this, and not so much about where we are now and what's happening and how everybody's working around it, but what is gonna be like after the pandemic. I asked a couple of friends, from colleagues from performing arts world, one all the way from Ireland and one from Alberta in Canada, and I'm gonna bring him on and we'll start our talk. Hello, David.
Shahin, how are you?
Hello, Shivani.
Hi there.
Thank you very much for agreeing to do this with me. Really kind of you. Just going to give a little introduction. David is a researcher, arts consultant, and creative producer. In March 2020, he was awarded a PhD by University College Dublin for his dissertation in Acting Democracy. Congratulations, by the way, David.
Thank you.
Practice and policy in contemporary Irish collaborative art. In addition to his work in research, he has, since 2016, held the position of festival advisor to the Arts Council of Ireland. Prior to this, David worked for 25 years as a creative producer in the professional arts sector in Ireland. And Shivani Saini is a consultant, producer, and a skillful communicator with over 25 years of professional media experience. Her company, Atelier Couturati, creates inclusive content and powerful engagement across multiple disciplines, with a vision to create and support works that positively transform the human condition. A graduate of Ryerson's radio and television arts program, Shivani has worked in all genres of media production, in every role from the creative to the business side. Her portfolio includes groundbreaking museum content, award-winning television and film, cutting-edge theater, international visual arts affairs, social media initiatives, and festivals that cultivate new works. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
David, thank you. David, let's start with you. Where are you and what's going on with you right now? What are you doing?
Well, I'm in Dublin at the moment, although I live in rural Ireland. I came here because the internet is stronger here, and I didn't want to jeopardize our conversation this evening. I've been looking forward to it. Like yourself, it's been a very strange year for me. I suppose one thing, for 25 years I was a producer, and I'm acutely aware that you live on the edge, one project to the next, or 1 year to the next. And certainly I was the CEO of a mid-range festival, a 10-day multi-art for 15 years. And the challenge of keeping that going was extraordinary and very enriching in many, many ways. And that's how we met when I was traveling looking for work. And the idea that that festival makers this year were going to have to not only not produce the festival that they had imagined, but that they were to reimagine festivals, because a lot of the festivals in Ireland, once the initial shock had worn off, they reinvented the festivals in either online or in public realm. It was an extraordinary year to see the resilience of the arts community in doing things. And I know we're here to talk about what comes next, but I think what happened this year has been really, really significant in terms of transforming the arts sector. The new knowledge that has been developed by the arts sector has been quite extraordinary. So my work this year has been as an observer, as a researcher. I've been trying to document and to preserve a record of what's happened this year, because and my focus has been on festivals because of my role within the Arts Council, but I'm also keeping abreast of the other art forms in terms of at the moment actually. It's interesting because the different festivals' response to COVID has been so different, depending on the art form. Because literary festivals were able to transition online very easily, but the performing arts festivals, for a lot of them, it has been much, much more difficult. And what's coming in the future is a really interesting question, because firstly, it's unknown. We can't know, but as producers and policymakers in the field, we have to try and have some idea so that we can prepare for it. And I think conversations like this, not just nationally, but transnationally, are really important, because I think that knowledge is being gained all around the world. And because of technologies, we can now share that.
Shivani, let me ask you the same thing, please, before we go into deep into what David was suggesting, like, what comes after. Where are you, and what's going on with you, and how you're dealing with all of this?
I'm based in Canada, specifically in Alberta, and more specifically in Edmonton. Although prior to COVID, a lot of the work was taking place not only in Edmonton and Calgary, but also in other parts of Canada. Like so many other artists and producers and creators, when COVID hit, a lot of the work that I had either got canceled or just got postponed. But there's still so much uncertainty about when things might actually pick up again. In the meantime, what has been happening is a lot of the projects I would have been involved in, a lot of those creators are trying to pivot themselves. And I personally have been thinking about ways that I can also do the same. In addition to being a producer and a consultant and someone who has done a lot of marketing work, there are other aspects of the work I've done in the past that I've tried to focus on. I think across the cultural sector, obviously there's a challenge when it comes to funding and to finances. I am seeing a lot of artists, colleagues, friends, still being able to develop and create works, which is great, although it's very pared down, it's very scaled back. And as someone who comes from a film and TV background, and then who has also worked in the performing arts, it's very interesting to see how quickly a lot of theater makers, for example, have tried to transition to doing works online. In some respects, it's been really interesting and exciting. Sometimes it's a little nerve-wracking. Some of that broadcast training and education kicks in, and there are things I'm seeing that I'm just like, oh my goodness, I'm not sure if that should be happening. But I think, on a professional note, I actually have been finding it incredibly inspiring to see how adaptable a lot of artists have been. And that desire and that drive that artists have to just continually create hasn't disappeared. The drive and the desire is still there, which I think is incredible. But you know, the manner in which they create and share and put out work obviously is in flux. And you know, I hope for the artists that I know and that are also dear friends of mine that they can get to a place where they don't have to be in flux for too long. Or even if they're in that flux, that they can find ways to enjoy what they're doing. I very much feel in the professional work I was doing, specifically when it comes to marketing and publicity for performing arts, that all of that work for myself has just sort of, again, been put on hold, and I feel like I'm on the periphery, or you know, just literally an observer in my home, watching things on a screen, like so many of us have been doing. But on a personal note, it's also been an incredibly, I think, empowering and inspiring time for myself. It's amazing what can happen when you have an opportunity to take a pause that might go on indefinitely. And when that time and energy gets freed up for you to be able to focus on other things that maybe you had wanted to do for a while, but could never really get to because you were so busy doing the work, or even new things that come up. You know, and of course, with everything that has happened and transpired over the last few months, you know, with, you know, the movement we've seen for Black Lives Matter, you know, with I think the collective voice, the solidarity for racial justice. I think that we're living in an incredibly powerful and empowering time. And I think the reality is that for anyone who's Black, Indigenous, a person of color, and also for folks who aren't, the timing of the timing of all of this is just has just inevitably fed into what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, and definitely will have an impact on the arts going forward.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm glad that to hear what you're saying. That's very inspiring. But for myself, I'm actually not happy about what's happening with the work that is going digital at all. Very early on, I saw a lot of problem with this, and I still think you know, it's actually getting bigger. I think you know, for me as a person who loves and lives for live performance, I know that nothing will replace that. Doesn't matter what kind of world we're going to be living, we're always going to have that as a big part of our life, live performance. Nothing can change it. And with the pandemic and performing world just completely dead, you know, the only thing was available to us was this, you know, talking to each other through this kind of ways of doing it. And doing this takes money and resources, for one thing. And usually that's not distributed equally amongst the workers. So you would get the bigger companies with bigger resources, and added to that, you know, all the governments are, because people are, you know, are not able to gather in the theater or in, you know, in concert halls. They're putting a lot of money in digital world. Again, you know, that gap keeps growing, and now the companies that were bigger had more resources, and now they have the added resources to do work online. And work online, performing arts work online loses a lot of quality. The only ones who can bring it to a little bit of quality are the ones with bigger resources. And I'm not happy about that at all. I think this is a very dangerous thing that we're entering, and we're undermining the work of a lot of new workers. And when we're talking about new workers in the scene, we're usually talking about people of color, which the great majority of people, I mean, all of us, working from that Commonwealth circle. And in that world, we know that the majority of the new workers in the art are people of color. And for all of those reasons, I'm not happy about this at all. I think we're headed in a very, very different world. If we continue to put more and more resources in the digital world, I think it's undermining the work of those people. What do you think about that, David?
Well, there's so much you've said there that I could respond to. I think the funding situation, I mean, I work for a funding organization for the Arts Council in Ireland. I would be familiar with the Canadian system and the American system, and certainly in USA, the situation is, I've been wondering about the situation because so much of the funding over there is through sponsorship. And certainly in Ireland, the smaller percentage of sponsorship has been reduced within the context of the pandemic because the organizations aren't able to deliver on their promise. Within the Arts Council in Ireland, it's interesting you're mentioning. I mean, I come from a white privileged background, so I too find the current situation with Black Lives Matter incredibly inspiring, and I think it's a very exciting time. I mean, the history in Ireland is quite particular because I left Ireland in 1988, and it was a very white country. We had very, very few people of color. And in fact, we had very few foreigners altogether because it had been a country of emigration rather than immigration. And due to the prosperity in the 90s and the noughties, Ireland now has a significant immigrant population, including people of color from Asia, Africa, South America. And their voices have been really quite prevalent during the pandemic. It's been, and within the Arts Council, there's a new equality, diversity, and human rights policy that has been launched in recent months, so that all arts organizations, they're just being asked within every application now to reflect on their policy in relation to these issues. So it's starting to be fed in. It doesn't mean you have to have a particular action in relation to those, or you don't have to. It doesn't have. Every organization doesn't have to be in EDHR focus, but that's just that it's somewhere in your thinking. So I think that's been interesting because it's a new phenomenon in Ireland, and I think this policy, in terms of the arts, allows the arts to play a leadership role in that. In terms of the digital, and your comments in relation to, I suppose, should we say, your anxieties or your depression in relation to it, I would say my responses have been from the completely negative to the completely positive. Living in a rural dwelling, which is really quite idyllic and beautiful, one of the things we've always suffered from was the fact that we didn't have access to culture. And it's access to culture that provides you with the nourishment you need to create culture. So we have found that the fact that we can now watch the Met online, opera at its best, and again, they have the resources to do that. But we've also been able to watch work by smaller organizations. I mean, one of my most memorable moments over the COVID pandemic, and this is through my work looking at the festivals in Ireland, was an American company called 600 Highwaymen. that did a show called 1,000 Ways, and I bought a ticket for it. Another interesting phenomenon, I think, is buying tickets for online experiences. I've learned that when I buy a ticket, I value the experience more. It adds to the experience. But this one was a phone conversation. I dialed into a phone conference call, old-fashioned, and I was met by a computerized voice, and I was introduced to another ticket buyer or audience member. And the computerized voice coordinated a conversation between me and that person over 45 minutes. And when it was over, I was left standing in my kitchen with tears in my eyes. It was a really high quality, extremely well crafted piece of work, like just really excellent. I know that I've been producer on work like that. I know how to get it right. It has to be extremely well crafted. So there's the experience of sitting with hundreds of people all over the world watching the Met, or having a conversation with one person in the room. Both of them equally excellent. I have had other experiences that have been less inspiring. So I think there's a huge range of possible experiences there. What I have noticed is that, and again, it's the live is missing. And I absolutely mourn for, and I yearn for, the smell of other audience members, the rubbing shoulders, and what I really, really yearn for is the foyer, because that moment before the show with the anticipation in the foyer, or after the show, and the possibility that you might meet somebody, and you can also unpick the show. Or I mean, when I go to museums, I generally talk to the invigilators, because I find I want to have a conversation, and they're people who are there all the time. And if they can be drawn into a conversation, it's usually very good. So it has been a turbulent year for me in terms of seeing wonderful possibilities opening up, seeing this emergence of the voices of minority voices in Ireland within the arts starting to come to the fore. And I think in some ways that digital space is allowing, because there's this moment when things are in flux, new voices can get in there. But at the same time, I have this, I'm acutely aware of the difficulty that artists and technicians, and I can't forget the technicians and the support people within theatre and within the festival ecology, that are really, really struggling. So it's a turmoil of positives and negatives that not dissimilar to the life we lead as artists and arts professionals on an ongoing basis. Just this year, it has been in a shocking kind of glare because of the pandemic. So,
Shivani, what do you think? I mean, the examples that David is giving, they're great. I mean, Met and a small company doing a hybrid work. I don't know if it would matter if it was pandemic or not. That work would still be great, I think. But my anxiety remains, I think, still. I mean, I'm talking about a small dance company being able to do the same work that a big dance company is able to do now. You know, the real Shakespeare comes and puts 10 cameras and 100 microphones and 50 tech people, and they basically make a film, and then they put it online.
I completely
cannot do that.
I completely understand the anxiety.
The quality of the work that it's quite changed. What do you think about it?
Well, I completely understand the anxiety from a few different perspectives. So I do think that you're right. There's definitely a disparity in terms of who's got the resources to be able to produce work of that quality. You know, and like you said, oftentimes it's a lot of the BIPOC artists that are the emerging artists, or perhaps the smaller companies that just aren't going to have access to the same kind of funds. And that does become problematic, especially if they're trying to create work and put it out online. From the perspective of a media professional who also has a really clear understanding of like what's involved in high quality, high caliber video production and broadcast production, it is problematic for me to see, you know, emerging theater companies or small theater companies try to all of a sudden become filmmakers and videographers and broadcasters. It is problematic. It's a whole other world. It's a whole other set of skills. They are a whole other set of jobs. And, you know, I do believe that you probably could take almost any narrative or story that might exist in the performing arts world and find some way to adapt it for the screen. But to do it properly does take a certain amount of money. It takes a certain amount of resources and a certain type of skill set to really, you know, pull that off and execute it in a way where you end up with something really beautiful. I mean, to me, to accomplish that, we're now really just talking about film and television production. We're talking about screen-based production, and then it, you know, in a way, it seems that if you were to try and achieve that quality, you're really moving out of the realm of live performance entirely, right? So,
I mean, even in the film and even in the film and television right now, I mean, England started before others, and here in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, like the studios, they're able to bring people and put them in a quarantine for 14 days before and after. Like they're able to do that. Now, you know, a small film could not do that. The best they can do is send everybody for a COVID test and then hope for the best and you know, take some measures.
Yeah, that's very true. So I think that what we're seeing in terms of people trying to transition to the online world, what my instinct says is that this is by no means any sort of permanent place that we're going to, you know, find ourselves in. It's not, to me, it's not the solution. But it does become an opportunity to experiment and to explore and to see what might actually be possible. And in some cases, like the examples David cited, it can work really beautifully, you know, and then we've seen examples where it does not. I think the question becomes really is, I think a question that needs to be explored during this time, during this state of flux that we're in, is if we want artists to be encouraged to try and explore this work online, then how are they being empowered to do it? And what kind of resources are they really being given? And how are those resources being distributed? You know, I have seen funders in Canada, for example, take their programming, completely rejig it, you know, and put things online. You know, we've seen examples of that with the National Arts Center, and there've been, I think we've seen some really, again, hits and misses come out of that, right? But I almost feel like this need to like take things online is just it's just an instinctive reaction to the sudden halt and stop that we've all been subjected to. But I'm not seeing necessarily a strategy from, say, funding bodies and like maybe say from associations that represent artist organizations. I'm not seeing any strategy necessarily around how to empower people in the right way to explore and experiment with this online world, and perhaps
where's the strategy?
Yeah, like perhaps that's something that needs to be looked at, and in the course of that strategy, there's definitely an opportunity to pull in the expertise of people who do work in the medium of film and TV and screen-based production. I'm not totally clear on what kinds of conversations around that type of strategy have taken place, if really at all. I think that there's an opportunity there. I think that conversations around that strategy could definitely help us help artists right now in the short term, but also help us navigate what might come after COVID as well.
David, we're not happy with the way it's been handled. Where's the strategy?
Well, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of the Irish Arts Council at all. I would be familiar with, certainly one of the initiatives brought in by the Irish Arts Council was because the Irish Arts Council, one of the really positive things in Ireland was that the Irish Arts Council, its funding was between 70 million a year, around 70 million a year. It had gone up to 80 million during the boom, and then it gone back down to 70 million. And the aim was always to get it to 100 million. And because of COVID, this year, the Irish Arts Council were awarded 130 million for 2021.
Wow.
Far in excess of what, this is what they had estimated they need for next year. But if this is a new benchmark for future funding, that is a positive outcome. I would agree that a certain amount of the funding schemes that have been initiated in Ireland, certainly, but I'm also aware of other European countries, have been a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. Just get money out there. And to some extent, one can understand that. And the need for that strategic thinking, that long-term thinking, is probably something that needs, as things start to settle, needs to be put in place. The Irish Arts Council have not been in the same building since March. They're all working remotely. There's a new director who started in the middle of COVID, so that's a really challenging in terms of the challenges of bureaucracy. So I think in the
same thing in Canada, David. It's just been like, here's more money and go and do some digital stuff. And then, like Shivani said, there's not a real clear leadership. And that's not just with the arts world. I think it's been with the everyday life. There has not been a leadership anywhere in the world how to deal with this pandemic.
It does things need to settle down. With the potential for vaccines coming on stream, maybe we'll start to find a new situation where people will start to look at strategies for the future. And I would agree with Shivani in respect of, I think there's been a lot of experiments. I think some of them have been good. I think those organizations and those artists who had a digital knowledge and were working in that domain or were exploring that domain had a huge advantage in this time. I know of some small dance companies that have done extraordinary screen dance because they had internally or within their small ecology the facility to do the filming work. That's not always possible. But I think as we look towards the future, I think what we're going to see is the knowledge that was gained this year from the successes, but also from the failures, is going to be a big part of the future. So, I imagine the three of us are yearning for a live experience again. And I think the live will come back. I think it has always come back. If we go back through, World War II, World War I, back to the Black Death, there have been periods when theatre didn't happen, when festivals couldn't happen. But I think they're part of human nature. I think the show is part of human nature. I think festivals are an integral part of societies. And I think they will reemerge. I think they're going to be different. I think.
So let's jump into it, David. So what do you see? Let's go right into it. Now you took us there. Let's what do you see? Because we know things will not be the same. I think we can all agree on that. We will not be going back to the same thing. I mean, a lot of schoolings. I mean, if they can do it online and it's been successful in many ways, why would they spend the money and go back? A lot of works. 50% of the workforce, the estimate is that a lot of them will not be going back to work. They'll be doing their work from home. We know we're not going back to the same world. What do you see for us, for the performing arts?
Well, I see us going back into theaters. I see festivals happening again. I see gatherings of people being essential. I would also see the online events continuing. And I think for somebody like me living in rural Ireland, that's fantastic. One of the things that we've lacked so much over 30 years living is that in the lack of access to high quality cultural work within a close proximity. So now we can do that. So there's a sustainability aspect to that as well. We don't have to travel, but we do need to travel for that community aspect. And I think that will come back. I think it will come back, but I think it'll also be different because I think that we've changed as audiences. We've changed. Are we going to be? I think some people will be yearning to get back into a room and sweating and dancing and having that intense, intimate experience at gigs. I think other people will not be. So I think that we're going to see changes in audience behavior, and I think we're going to also see that the artists have evolved. That artists will have new skill sets because of the experimenting with technology. So I think even in the live situation, we're going to see elements of that. My fear is that depending on how long this hiatus happens, is how much talent we're going to lose from the sector, because of the people not being able to sustain their life as an artist and moving off, and that's a real worry. And you also mentioned, I think earlier on, in terms of people coming into the world. It's one thing if you already have a network. You can connect with that network online. That's been happening in many different ways. I attended a gathering of Canadian theatre makers that Danny Fecco had organized, and Danny attended an event I was doing in Ireland. So that connection, that not just nationally but transnationally, can happen. But for those people who are coming out of college, looking to start up, that might not have those networks, I think that's where you need the real situation. I was at a conference today, and I've been attending the conference over the last week as in my capacity as an early career academic, and I haven't attended this conference before. It's an annual conference. So a lot of the people might have known each other, but I didn't know anybody, and I didn't meet anybody over the 5 days of the conference because that wasn't possible. So my capacity to develop an academic network is not possible in this environment. And I think that's the same in the arts. So yourself at festivals, how we met at a convention where there were cultural professionals, and you meet, you have dinner together, you have a beer or not, as was the case, and you build relationships, and those are the relationships that you build with your career. So let's hope that this hiatus will not go on too long, because I think there's a real.
But I think that's the key. I mean, that's the key. How long it takes, it will affect how many people will have to change career, and the more people consume their art from other venues, other ways, it will affect their behavior, right, Shivani? I mean, what David is saying is key. I think how long this will take, it will have a bigger impact and a bigger change.
Yeah, I think my vision for the future is very similar to David's. I think that there will be a return eventually to live events, in venues like theaters and festivals. I think human nature just can't be stopped when it comes to that. I think we all need to be able to gather and be with each other. But the online world definitely will continue. And there, like David had said, there are some definite advantages where folks in certain locations that are remote can now continue to have access to the work. And the interesting thing I've also seen too is when the work has been successful online, it just has the ability to reach a much, much larger audience than it would ordinarily simply as a live work in a specific location. I think you're right when you say that, there are a lot of emerging artists that aren't going to have the ability to build up the networks that, we, for example, would have been able to build up when we were emerging as artists and not in a pandemic. And I think then we've got existing artists as well that maybe will transition completely out of the arts because of no, because of the fact that they simply have no choice and they need to earn a living somehow. I think the question becomes then also, it comes back, I guess, to strategy and to conversations around, okay, what are we going to do when we do get back to that place where we can gather together again and we have a combination of live and online continuing? What can we do to bring back the artists that we already had, and what can we do to try and support and nurture and develop the talent of the emerging talent that should have the right to be able to explore the work they chose to pursue? I think the arts sector needs to also think about creating that capacity that is inevitably going to be needed, so that we don't find ourselves in another type of crisis when things can finally open up again, and now all of a sudden there's a deficit, and we just don't have the artists or the ones that would have graduated or that were emerging have gone the same route as the other established artists that maybe will be lost.
Both of from from the gatherings and the talking, especially amongst the Commonwealth organizations and the community, that before pandemic in the performing arts world, we actually had a very consistent increase of participation over the years from people. That I just don't see that's like going back. Are we going back to that number and then increasing? I mean, especially with the new generation. I mean, I have one kid who's 18, one kid who's 11, and they're very happy with consuming their art from online, and that will just increase.
But things change, Shaheen, and as we get older,
can we accept that will be the world, that the performing arts world will be extremely decreased, the participation will be extremely decreased?
Well, another show, just to give you another example of one of,
I mean, I don't want to be negative, but I think it's
one of the experiences.
I just want.
One of the experiences I had this summer was with the Dublin Fringe Festival. They decided they weren't going to put any pre-recorded work on. That if you were doing they were looking for submissions from artists who would do work live online. So I did two shows. One of them was called 25, and it was about the year 2050. It was about the year 2050. It was imagining, and it was a Zoom show with the artist in a theater space, but talking to us at home, the 50 of us who were online, and interviewing a different guest each night who was a performer, or and sometimes talking to the audience. So that work was a work that was created. It was experienced live. We paid for our tickets. And the other show was called Initiation. And that show, you were sent an email and you had to have various props beside you when the show started. So you had a glass of water and a scissors and a basin of water. No, the glass had whiskey in it, I think. And during the show, while the narrator, who was never visible, we were looking at each other on the screen. There were just 25 of us at that show. And during the show, as this story about this person on a night out in a club who falls through a door into this world and becomes part of gets sucked into joining a cult. And when the protagonist was submerged in water, you were asked to put your head in the basin of water. And when they had a slimy thing to eat, and you had to break a raw egg and eat the raw egg. So that was a very inventive way of having a live experience with other people while still being trapped in your home. So I think the next generation will find it a lot easier to use that interactive, that collaborative aspect of the internet is not really being used by the Met. We are passive audience when we watch the Met on our screens. And a certain amount of the work that was done by the festivals in Ireland and the theatres in Ireland was something you watched. And you could be watching Netflix. And I was kind of questioning, well, this or that, and why wouldn't I watch Netflix where they have a budget of 25 million to make a few episodes, whereas these, so there was a different, and you weren't comparing like with like, but where you were paying for your ticket and you were having a live experience, it was different. So I think there are all these different types of experiences that can be had online.
So a different perception of live and different perception of,
and different uses for the internet, and all of them have as in the arts in general. I mean, the wonderful thing about the arts is the range. I mean, one of the fears I have is that the Met is not producing any work this year, so they've cancelled the season. So for me, the richness of the arts is the two-person work, is the community art projects that are happening in locales with marginalized communities, but also that range that goes to. I mean, what I see is, I mentioned the Met because I see it as a kind of a pinnacle of excess. I mean, the cost of the opera is just so extraordinary, and sometimes I question that, but just that excellence and that the power of a full orchestra and a full chorus and is something that I would like to see in the world, as well as the intimate experiences. So is there a greater vulnerability of the big organizations than the small organizations? Small organizations have a flexibility and a fleetness of foot. But the bigger organizations, big institutions, if this goes on for a long time, many of them are not going to survive.
Yes. Shivani, I'm being extra negative about this, but I think both me and David, we agreed that our perception of live is changed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As far as, I'm not as optimistic as David. I still have a lot of anxiety. I understand that a lot of good has come out of it. For me personally, in these times, I learned to swim and I started learning piano online. And for a lot of people, I've been doing most of my work just on my writing because I can't, and I'm sort of standing against the whole digital world because I think it is undermining. That was my whole back, perhaps. But I think just now, me and David, we agreed that our perception of what is life has changed and will remain change, and it will still change.
Yeah, I think what live will be and how we experience it is definitely going to continue to evolve, for sure. And what's exciting for me about that is the opportunities that exist in that context, in that type of flux. So, I also think that despite the fact that young folks right now can very easily be entertained by things on a screen, it isn't something that can be replaced by experiences they have in live spaces. And I think that when they get an opportunity to be able to come back into a live space, or say be introduced to a live space, maybe for the first time, say down the road, once things with this pandemic have calmed down and people can gather again, you might be pleasantly surprised by the kind of reaction that comes from young folks who get to experience something live, because there is nothing quite like it. The screen is not and cannot be a replacement for what we feel in a space together when it's happening in real time. I think that, again, I think the resources and the capacity need to be in place to really ensure that, when we make that transition back to live, to the new live, that that the artists are being supported, so that live can continue, so that that live performance art, live theater art can still be sustained. I think that is going to be really important, to be able to prepare and plan for that. I think the sector has to be able to prepare and plan for that and anticipate that. So, yeah.
Like what? Give us a few practical things, Shivani. Like what? When you say prepare for it, like what? Where do you want to see the resources go to right now?
I think when it comes to, I think I would have to take it back to some things I've already mentioned earlier in this conversation. I think for right now, for any artists or organizations that are wanting to experiment and play with the online world and ways for their work to be shared online, it would be great if there could be, some strategy around how to explore it, rather than having these artists just try to figure it out themselves. Because if they're performing artists and they're not, film and television artists, there's a big learning curve there. In the long term, when we transition to a place of the new live, with the online world still continuing, what I would love to see is the sector ensuring that the resources to bring artists back in, and also to encourage and support and nurture emerging artists, exists. To me, it almost seems like we'll need to have, maybe program is a word for it. We'll need to have supports in place. Even if, a theater company can just open back up, they still need all of the people. And it isn't just the artists either, right? It's also, like we had talked earlier, the technicians. There are so many people involved in a single production going up, and all of those folks, they need to be supported so they can make that transition back to the performing arts world. I think that, I suppose in an ideal way, the ideal for me would be if a theater company or a performing arts company gets to a point where they're ready to open up their doors again, and they can actually embark on producing a season. The ideal is to ensure that they have the funds that they need to be able to bring all of those people back that they're going to need. What exactly that looks like or how that would manifest, I think, is a much bigger question, obviously.
And see, I think that the support should go exactly to the opposite of. I think that the connecting on internet is inevitable, and we're doing that in great ways. It will bring its own resources because the consumers are there. I think actually that resources should go towards small companies, venues that they should be able to do a small performances with a small audiences. That's where I think the resources should go. I don't think we need to put any extra help towards the digital world at all right now. I think we should actually support those venues and those companies who want to do the work live. What do you think about that, David? Where do you think the resources need to go right now?
Well, excuse me, I seem to have lost you.
We lost you for 1 second.
For a little moment, so I've moved closer to the router as I was instructed. Interestingly, just to connect what you were saying, Shivani, and what you had said before that, Shahin, and I think this is something in the longer strategy for the Irish Arts Council, as I understand it. It has been important to invest in providing resources for artists to experiment online and for festivals and arts organizations to be able to support artists doing work online. I think the next phase is about investing in the artists, so that through 2021, I think there's a huge opportunity for artists to spend time, like you have been writing, Shahin, so that time is spent, that the artists are given resources, because as we emerge from the pandemic, let's hope that is a reality, or even as we learn to live with it, which might be the other reality, that the artists that there have been funds invested in artists to provide a response to this time. And the other thing is, I think, the public realm. I think open spaces. I think we've already seen that in Ireland, how festivals are, and even the theatre company. I mean, the National Theatre, the Abbey Theatre, they produced a production of The Great Hunger, which they did outdoors. Druid Theatre, which is internationally renowned, did a season of work of Lady Gregory, and they did it, and they toured the county of Donegal. They did it in outdoor spaces. So again, this is how organizations are finding different ways to operate. And as we move into 2021, and as I say, hopefully a post-pandemic situation, all of these, the learning of this time will be impacting on how these organizations continue their work. So I think we might see work moving more into the public realm, more work, and we're going to see all of that technology then coming in, as I said before. But I do think investing in the artists is a key. Investing in stories and storytellers, and providing them with that time and that space that they need to make work.
David, let's, I mean, both of you, Shivani, David, let's agree, just for sake of argument, that we will find some normalcy by the beginning of 2022. We're pretty much to the end of the year, and next year will be the year of the vaccination, and just dealing with it and getting it all over the world, because we can't just talk about the rich countries and and the resources. If 2022, beginning of 2022, is we find some normalcy, give us your what do you see? Very like very short picture of beginning of 2022. You see what for the performing arts world, David?
Gosh. That's a difficult question. I mean, the beginning of a normalcy, my focus is very much on festivals. I mean, over the last, and festivals in Ireland, and these are festivals that are different art form festivals. So they could be traditional art form, traditional music festivals, or contemporary dance festivals, or multidisciplinary festivals. The landscape is extremely diverse in that many of these organizations are run by one or two people. Many of them are voluntary. Some of them are semi-professional, where staff are paid part-time, and others up to the bigger festivals will have staff of 8-10 people. So the range is quite extraordinary, but together they make up a really, really interesting landscape. And I have been so impressed with the way they have responded this year, the resilience they've shown. I think it's inevitable that a number of festivals will not survive this time. But then again, in the normal course of events, some organizations are going to run their course and other organizations are coming on board. And this is moving out of Ireland, but the young student who showed us around Tehran when we were in Tehran together, can you remember his name, Shahin?
The big work in the garage. No, not right now.
He was a young man. I mean, he was 19 at the time, so he's of a different generation to you and I. And when COVID's, he's like in his late 20s now, I think. And when COVID began, he started an online festival. Mm-hmm. So they're in the midst of the pandemic, confined to home. He and his friends started an online festival. So we're going to see some festivals not happening in 2022 that might have happened in 2019. But we're also going to see other festivals that have emerged. And with the new talents and the new, and I think we're going to see a re-emerging. And 2022 might be slower. I think hopefully by 2023, 2024, we will be back, and but as we, Shivani was saying as well, I think the landscape will be different for many, many reasons. But I think we need to be there. I think that's something that humanity has done throughout time and throughout societies of different colors and creeds. And I think in the modern day, the arts in particular provide a space where different colors, different creeds, different nationalities can meet together, and where ideas can be exchanged, and they're absolutely vital. So certainly that has been my commitment to date, and one I hope I can continue for some years to come.
Good. Shivani, David's on this one, David's not as optimistic as me. I said 2022. So what is he thinks it will take a little bit longer, and he's probably right about this. I think it will take longer for us to come back to some kind of normalcy. Going back to the end of last year. What do you see for the beginning of 2022? What's the landscape? What does the world of performing arts will look like?
I think there will be a lot of optimism. I guess depending on how 2021 goes, depending on what happens with this pandemic and with the vaccine, and with how quickly that curve can be really flattened. But assuming that all of that goes well, I could see people being quite excited, quite enthusiastic about opening up again, gathering again. I think that in a way, the act of being able to gather together at first is probably going to it's going to have more importance and more significance than what we might be gathering for. Like, yes, the work that artists are going to create and put out there, of course, will always be important. And, you know, it will always be important for that to be shared. But I think people are just going to be so happy to be able to gather together again in spaces. And I think we're also just going to have a new appreciation for it. And I think that's important, because I think that's going to, like, not only for the artist, but also for the patrons, I think that's just going to continue to feed into how these experiences evolve and how they change. You know, I think that artists, of course, are just going to be so incredibly appreciative of a live audience and being able to feel the energy of a live audience, and vice versa. But I think that I think there's an element of that yeah, will somehow end up feeding into how the work and the experience of the work evolves. You know, and I think people will probably be, you know, I think the appreciation will probably result in people hopefully being much kinder to one another. You know, and I'm sure a lot of people will be drinking a lot of wine and beer and scotch and whiskey and whatever they can get their hands on as soon as possible. You know, so like I remember going to the Edinburgh Film
You're saying it as if like people are really like thirsty for alcohol right now. I'm sure a lot of alcohol drinking is going on right now.
Well,
what will happen to people like me who don't drink then?
You'll just drink more water, Shaheen. That's all. More juice or something, coffee too. But you know, I remember going to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival a few years ago in 2018. It was the first time I had been, and you know, it's just such an incredible experience when you get to gather with people, and there's nothing like it. You get to meet new people, you get to experience new work, and there's so much of it that just feels so celebratory. So that's kind of where my instinct feels, where my instinct is landing in terms of what 2022, early 2022 could potentially look like. And if not early 2022, then perhaps 2023 or 2024, like they would suggest. So, but you know, I think regardless of the work that gets created or the volume of work that might be available, I think the simple fact that the work exists and we're in a position where we can gather together again to celebrate it is what will perhaps be most important.
Most important. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. You know, we had 3 very different views on this very important issue, but I think we came to some solid understanding, and I hope this helps putting this out there. Again, thank you very much, David, Shivani. Really appreciate it, giving us your time and your words.
Well, thank you so much for thinking of us and inviting us on.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you, Shivani.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
As I'm saying goodbye to Shivani and David, I just wanted to say, you know, I'm going to continue doing this work. I hope you can join me on the YouTube channel. I'm going to do more of this. Again, I'm doing this because I think it's important for artists of color to occupy more space digitally on the internet. And as an artist, I'm talking about the things that I find interesting. The art, culture, and the politics of today. And again, please share the work and talk to others about this. This is very important. You all either go to see work, or you're an artist who wants to get back on stage and do the work. So let's keep talking about it. Let's be hopeful, like our guest said. Yeah, please, if you can, go on my YouTube channel and subscribe. That's very important to me, to build this, what I'm doing. Thank you again. Bye.